Hey, everybody. Welcome to EduMatch. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have an amazing conversation coming your way on a topic that is extremely important and critical to discuss. So I'm very honored today to be having this conversation. So thank you so much to Leslie, aka the Faginator, for bringing it up. She's going to be our moderator for tonight. So our topic tonight will be race, education, and politics. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off with some panel introductions. So each of our panelists will introduce themselves briefly, just like their name, their role, and anything else they want to share with us. So we're going to kick things off with Z.
All right. My name is Zanae, and this is my 6th year in education. I'm also a doctorate student, and I'll be doing my dissertation on how to whether or not mentoring and parental involvement lowers male suspension rates, especially within the African American population. So that's a little about me.
Awesome. Well, welcome to Tweet and Talk. We are so glad to have you here and can't wait to learn with you tonight. So awesomeness. Next up, we have Marcus.
Hey guys, this is Marcus, an adjunct instructor in the St. Louis region. Been adjunct for about 5 years, going on my 5th year. I'm also a financial literacy instructor. Been doing that for about 12 years, and I'm also a financial services professional.
Well, welcome to Tweet and Talk, Marcus. So great to have you here. So welcome, and yeah, looking forward to the conversation. So we're going to go next to Doc Amy.
Hey there, I'm Dr. Amy, and I am an educator, and I also help educators who want to become entrepreneurs, and I'm super, super, super excited about today's discussion. I've been hype about it all week.
Yes, absolutely, as have I. So welcome back. Always great to have you here. So welcome. We also have Shilpi, who will be back, and when she comes in, and we'll have her introduce herself. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and go to our fantastic moderator. So Leslie, if you could please introduce yourself and then go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Fagin. I am an educator in the Middle Georgia region. I don't want to give out my school district because they may have issues with what I'm saying. But anyway, I work in Georgia. I used to be an English teacher. Now I am an instructional technology coach, and I work with secondary school teachers on effective technology integration. I'm glad that people are excited about tonight's topic. I am using this Tweet and Talk tonight to get some information on the research that I'm doing for the book that I'm writing. I am writing a book about race, education, the American political system. So I'm hoping to get some insight from what you all have to say. I've been working on my book, but I just want to hear what other people have to say and share their experiences. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question. Okay, if only I could see. Sorry, y'all. Okay, what exactly does the term racism mean to you? Who would like to start our conversation?
Well, let me start first, if that's okay. When I think of the term racism, I think of a system of control that affects non-white people in terms of control of economics, politics, in every facet of a people group's life. It's not something that is individually focused. It's something that is more group based. So typically when you talk about, even when you have the conversation about the subject of race or racism and stuff like that, a lot of times it's usually moderated or initiated by people of color. And it's usually a subject that people tend to want to stay away from, because when you start talking about the historical aspects of it and things of that nature, whether you talk about the law, whether you talk about what's recorded in history, however it may have been recorded and things of that nature, it typically tends to be one-sided. And usually you'll have people on one side who are come across as finger pointing and pointing the blame, as opposed to saying, listen, this is what has been documented from the standpoint of the laws of the land. This is what's been documented in the history books. This is what people have been compelled to learn and to accept as the standard and the norm. So when you talk about that subject, like I said, it's that systematic control that affects all facets of a people group's life.
I really like what you had to say there, Marcus. I agree wholeheartedly with you. And I have, social media dictates, well, not necessarily dictates, but social media consumes a lot of what people take in. And I'm just curious to hear what some other people have to say, because we've, wrapped up Black History Month, obviously, in February. And a lot of people that I've seen on social media have posted things about, that because we celebrate Black History Month, that's, a form of reverse racism against white people. So I'm just curious to see if we can get a perspective from some other of our panelists.
I'm gonna jump in on here. I had did a little YouTube episode about how, like, while we definitely need Black History Month, it gives white educators and the powers to be permission to tuck it away. We'll save that for February. We don't need to we don't need to have it on our SATs, our standardized tests, our textbooks. We don't need to have African-American curriculum or a history course or an ethnic lit class, because we'll do it in February. And I see people just wait and wait and wait. And so when you get to February, and kids they know usually 5 Black people by the time they graduate high school. Malcolm Martin, Rosa Harriet, maybe, musician, like somebody else. But look, I'm having trouble rattling off some people right now, just thinking of people that I learned about in high school. So it's necessary. We have to have it, because if it's not mandatory, it won't get done at all. But it needs to be it's giving permission to just tuck it away and not fool with it the rest of the month.
Hey everyone, I'm going to pop in for a quick second. So we had 2 people just join us. So if we could have Shilpi and Angela introduce themselves, please, that would be awesome. So we'll start things off with Shilpi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I was having this audio trouble. So I'm an entrepreneur and actually provide mindfulness and SEL resources and facilitation for schools. I actually also work at the detention center, where I go and give mindfulness classes and help youth with their anger management issues and give them strategies and life skills that they can use to manage themselves.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much for being here and for introducing yourself. So welcome back to Tweet and Talk. Awesome. And next up, we have Angela. Angela, welcome to Tweet and Talk. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please. All right, I think you might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so you want me to introduce myself?
Yes, please.
This is like my second time ever doing Google videos, so just bear with me, you guys. I'm a little old school. So I'm Angela Dye. I am a former charter school operator. I designed and launched and founded and operated my own school for 5 years for grades 6 through 12. I've been an educator for 25 plus years. I am a licensed teacher, grades 6 through 12, and then a licensed administrator. I hold 2 administrative license, principal's license, and then curriculum and instruction. About 7 years ago, I stepped outside of the school structure just because I just didn't feel that it fit. I have periodically tried to find my way back in it. So I've been working on some entrepreneurial projects on the side. And then the other thing that I do on the side is I actually teach teachers. I teach about 4 classes. I teach 2 classes where there are teachers who are going back to get their master's in leadership. They've been teaching for at least 3 years. And then I have 1 class where I have teachers who are candidates. They'll be graduating in May, but they have been teaching on the job, learning on the job for 2 years. And then I have teacher candidates who are in their 2nd semester. So I'm to be honest with you, I'm all over the place, but I've just been trying to find my way in the world outside of the traditional structure. Well, I'm going to put you guys on mute because my dogs are barking in the background. Sorry about that.
Oh, not a problem. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Angela. It's so great to have you here on panel. So we appreciate you joining us. So I'm going to kick it back over to Leslie. So she was asking the first question, and everyone was kind of operationalizing their definition of racism. So back to Leslie.
Okay, if anybody else would like to jump in and talk about your definition of racism, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll jump in for that question. I totally agree with what Marcus said. It's a system that's kind of set up But also it's a belief system, the belief that one race or group of people are superior or even inferior to the other group. I think a lot of times people get racism and prejudice, they kind of marry them together when in fact they're separate. They have the same, in a lot of instances, outcome or motive behind it, but it's totally different. So it is a system. When we think of things such as where um, I remember learning about something that where African Americans at a point in time could only buy homes in a certain area, or were only opened up for certain loans to get things like that, systematic things that are set up to almost put one group of people and another group of people on a pedestal, while one is seen as, not worthy or of value.
Thank you. I like that. And as you all are talking, I'm jotting down some notes for things that I want to make sure that I address in my book. So if you will, just, keep talking. And I'm hoping that once this book is finished, that I can share this with you, because your insight has so far already been valuable to me. And we've only been talking for just a few minutes. If there's anybody else who'd like to jump in and share your definition of racism, that's great. If not, we can move on to question number 2. Is there anyone else who'd like to share their definition of racism?
Yeah, I can jump in, and I would agree to what Ziana said, that it's like when you perceive a race superior to another, and it's all pervasive. I mean, you've seen through history, it's just not African American, what happened with the Jews in Germany, or what has happened in the Asian subcontinent, where the colonists ruled over the people, the aboriginals of the continent, and with the belief that they are an inferior race and they are a superior race, and that kind of thinking unfortunately still continues. I would also add that a lot of racism is now sort of an implicit bias, because it's not evident. People think that they don't think like that, but a lot of it is subconsciously built through media, through family history, through curriculum, through education.
Thank you. Do we have a comment from YouTube Live? And this is what Lauren has to say. I believe racism is a prejudice or discrimination against someone or a group of people based on belief. Sorry, having difficulty with my glasses here. Based on belief or color, especially when distinguishing that person or group as inferior. Okay, thank you, Lauren. That is most definitely true. And I just want to point out, and I've had this conversation with some of my colleagues, that people think that because I'm a woman of color that I'm looking to stir trouble up. I'm not. I really and truly want to have an honest conversation, because I have seen people of other races be victims of racism. So it's not that I'm trying to stir things up and say, well, because I'm a Black woman, I think that everybody is out to get me. That is definitely not true at all. So I like that we have people of various races here on this panel so that we can get a different perspective. So let's jump on.
Yep.
Oh, yes, you may.
Can I jump in right quick? I'm sorry, and I joined the conversation late, so if I'm redundant or repeating anything, just consider it as a reinforcement. Can you hear me? You can hear me. I didn't hear you. Looks like you were talking.
You're
okay.
Good. We can hear you.
I'm just going to keep talking. I think of racism as a social structural issue. And most people think of racism as it relates to interpersonal. And one thing I didn't mention, I didn't talk about my podcast. That's crazy. But at the end of every episode, I give my callers an opportunity to talk about where do they think the power or the problem most resides, at the structural level, cultural level, interpersonal, or intra. And most people, they do talk about the structural aspect. And I see that's where racism is situated. So it doesn't matter how nice you are or how kind you are, when the policies and the institutions and the norms are situated to give you a disadvantage and to give someone else an advantage, that's racism. I don't usually spend my time talking about interpersonal racism. and I know we're going to go into the next question about how does it impact you personally, but I just wanted to make sure that we also consider structural racism, and that's the racism that's baked into the policies, the laws, the institutions, what's considered normal or acceptable. It actually institutionally favors some people and disadvantages some. And you also may have talked about this already, that there's what's called anti-Black racism, which is a different form of racism. And I just wanted to put that on the table as well. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. I love these perspectives that we're getting. And as Angela mentioned, our next question, how has racism affected you in a personal way? I've got my own story, but I would like to hear your stories first, please, if somebody would jump in and share their own personal experiences with racism.
Okay, I'll hop in. I work at an alternative school. I'm not going to say my school district either, because they probably wouldn't be happy with what I'm going to say either. But the alternative school, it's full of Black kids. It's the Black school. And I have said it a zillion times. You can't tell me white kids aren't misbehaving. Why are we just getting Black kids? So obviously it doesn't me personally. It impacts me personally because it's a revolving door of Black kids. It's just over and over and over again. I've been there almost 5 years. And if we've had 10 white kids, I'd be surprised. It's alarming, and it's so blatant and it's so obvious, and they don't do anything about it. So, I mean, I see it in the labeling with special ed services, and then just the immediate, like, let's just throw them in alternative school. Let's suspend them. Let's put them in ISS. And then if you're not in class, you can't learn any better behavior. So, and then just cycles and spirals out of control.
Amy hit the nail right on the head. I started my teaching career in the alternative school. And like Amy, I noticed that there were a large number of African-American students at our alternative school. And one of the things that I was able to glean from that is that the non-African-American parents had resources to send their kids to private schools. So they were still being educated. And I'm not going to say that the children in the alternative school weren't being educated, but they weren't, because they were already behind, because they were chronic discipline problems. They were already behind. So they weren't necessarily getting the same education that they would have had they been in a more traditional classroom setting. So that concerns me, because our children need to be educated. If they're not going to get an education, how are they going to be successful? So let's just continue on, and then I will go back and share my story of how racism affected me in a personal way.
But a lot of times those kids that are, this is Angela, a lot of times those kids who are in the alternative programs, it's not just race, you have issues of class as well. And so there's this intersectional aspect, or what I like to call compounded oppression, that when, like you said, student families who have resources can send their kids to other schools to get those services, and the families that don't have the resources, they can send their kids to the public setting. I don't think that's just an issue of race. I think that's also an issue of class, which for a lot of times for African-American students, it's hard to determine which marker of oppression is leading that placement into the alternative settings.
Okay, I just want to jump in and say how excited I am about this conversation. Again, there are so many, seriously, I never thought about classism being a form of oppression. And this conversation right now is just absolutely blowing my mind, because as I was laying out my book, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to focus on this. Well, now because of this conversation, I need to throw in that piece about classism. And I think that that's the perfect segue to what I want to say. When I was a junior in high school back then, and I don't know if I don't think that, well, actually, I know they don't still do it this way, because I taught at the school that I graduated from. When I was a junior, I had to get permission from my parents and from my 11th grade English teacher to take the AP class my senior year. Well, my parents had already signed off on it. And when I went to my teacher, her response was, no, you're not smart enough. And I just kind of sort of stood there like, did she seriously just say that to me? And I said, but I'm in program challenge. And that's the program for our gifted students. You had to be tested. You had to make a certain score. You know, your IQ had to be high enough. And I was in the program challenge. So I was like, I'm in program challenge. And I graduated from high school 32 years ago. And I know I look 21, but I'm not. But anyway, I graduated from high school 32 years ago. And her response to me was, well, they have to let one of you in. And I was, yeah. It bothers me to recall that situation. They have to let one of you in. And at that point, I never doubted that I was smart, but I was like, okay, is she for real? Am I the token Black in the program challenge at my high school? Well, I'm not, and I wasn't, but I was the only gifted child of color in the program. But she said that to me. Now, my parents were not, poor. My dad was retired Army. He worked for the U.S. Department of Education. We were a comfortable middle-class family. And I say we, but it really wasn't me. It was my dad's money. It wasn't mine. But we were middle class. So classism didn't play a part there. But I think she thought, and a lot of people made the assumption because they never saw my dad. He traveled a good bit with his job. They never saw him. They assumed that my mother was another Black woman who had a bunch of children and there was no father around. My parents were married until my mother died 18 years ago. So that may be part of classism because she had that assumption. I'm Black. I come from a single parent home when I did not. Like I said, my parents were together and had been for a number of years. I'm bothered by that. And I know that other people have stories as well. And I know that this is something that our children are still facing in school. And although not all of us are in the classroom, and this is a question that we will address in a little bit, but a lot of us have stories that need to be told because this is a conversation that needs to be had. So if anybody else would like to share their story, that would be great.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so I mean, when I go to the detention center, this is something I witness all the time. The majority of my kids are African American. And when I speak to the cops, I see such systemic racism and dysfunction.
Okay, I think Shopi might be frozen, but does anyone else have something that they'd like to share on this? All right, Leslie, if you wanted to go ahead on to the next question. And I think you might be muted.
I am. I'm having trouble looking at the colors today. I'm having a lot of trouble, actually. Okay, our next question is, in what ways does race play a role in education? And we've kind of touched on that a little bit in our conversation so far, but if anybody has any particular examples, that would be, this would be a nice time to share that.
I think race should, but I don't necessarily think it does, play a role in curriculum development. Just as a woman, as an adult now, I see how much I learned the male perspective. I learned about male warriors, kings, all the wonderful things that the white men did from Europe, right? And I think, again, I don't know if I can name 5 women that I could look up to. I'm upset that I was in my 30s before I found out women got us to space. Black women got us to space. Like, if I had known that, I probably wouldn't have been dressing up like a cheerleader for career day. Not that there's anything wrong with cheerleading, but I could have been a scientist. Like, I didn't even realize that was an option. And so, like, that, when the decision makers are not keeping all of the colors and all of the gender, like, we all need to be included in it, and it needs to be representative. And it can't just be, we're just going to do this blanket curriculum. We're going to do this blanket reading list. This is the history we're going to teach. Like, it has to be evolving with the climate and culture of your kids. Not necessarily happening, but that's, like, the stories you teach us and the content you teach us are going to mold us as adults. So it needs to be relevant. I need to see my story. I need to see my face. I need to know how, even down to things like, again, I keep whipping back to gender, but then I won't even talk about it because it's about gender. Okay, all right, that's it.
And I'll piggyback off of what Amy said as far as like curriculum. So I used to teach English, and to kind of top it off, it was a a very small percentage of people of color within our team. I'm not going to say the district I was in. I'm not going to tell, but one of the things that I noticed when it came to our books that we read was that they only gave one perspective, and that was the European male perspective. And so when I was questioning it, like, hey, a lot of our students were from Vietnam. You had students from Puerto Rico. You had students, not just, we had a very diverse group of students. And so they wanted, and granted, exposure is great. We want our kids to be exposed to different things, but they wanted all students to read the Iliad, which right now it has no relevance to them. So if I think the curriculum part is key. You have to have an inclusive curriculum that allows each kid to see themselves in something, to have some kind of connection to it.
Thanks, Z. I like what you said, because that leads into our next question, which is, what are some ways that we as educators can combat racism? And I remember when I was teaching, to me, in what was a pivotal time in American history, when President Obama was elected as president of the United States. And until that point, obviously, we all know that we had not had an African-American as a president. One of my former students was at a private school at that time, and she told me that she left the private school and came to the public school because the children she had gone to school with for all of her life all of a sudden turned on her because she was African-American, and they felt like the Black people were, having some kind of uprising. That is obviously not the case. And she tried to tell them. She said, and she was only in, I think, 7th or 8th grade at the time. And her insight to me was incredible, because she said, there are not enough Black people in the world to have elected Barack Obama as president. So obviously some white people had to vote for him, and they didn't believe her. And it's like, all you need to do was look at the numbers for the people who were registered voters in the United States. But she told them that, but they still made her so uncomfortable that she had to leave and come to the public school, because they didn't like that. Well, like I said, that they thought that Black people were taking over. And I heard comments from people, we don't need a Black president. If I have educator friends who are saying things like that, what message is that sending to my students? So just, if anybody else, and we do have to keep mindful of the time, but please feel free to jump in and share. How do you think that we can fix those issues with our students?
So I think the biggest thing is names. I think that pronouncing a student's, because your name is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. So I make it a point in the classroom to pronounce my student's name correctly. A lot of my students from Vietnam, they try to tell me their American name, like Bob or Van. And I'm like, no, what's your real name? Because that's important. Even if our students of color who have very beautiful and unique names, it's important that educators take the time and learn that child's name, because their name is unique. It's a part of their experience. It's a part of their culture. It's a part of their race. So I think even the little things that we sometimes skip over, that's the most important part, to me, at least.
Can you all hear me? You can hear me? Okay. Ooh, I've been trying to get in for a while, and my audio wasn't working too well. When you talk about what you can do to address those things, there's a couple of things you need to understand as an educator. I think it's important that we understand history, not just as told from history books, but told from the perspective of the law. And I mention that because there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Claude Anderson who wrote several different books. One is called Black Labor, White Wealth, Dirty Little Secrets, Powernomics, and a few others. But one of the things he talked about that I thought was a very interesting point that I don't hear a lot of educators talk about is, when you talk about history, it's important to study the laws of a nation. Because if you really want to get a true perspective of history, if you study the laws of a nation, the laws of the nation will tell you the true history. They'll tell you the tone, the sentiment, the ideology that people had. And so when you start talking about the subject of racism and stuff like that, and you kind of frame it
Okay, I think Marcus may be frozen, but did anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You carry on. That's okay.
As a white teacher, to the other white teachers, call it out. When you see it, call it out. And what does it look like? It means when you hear ladies chit-chatting and gossiping and giggling about the Black kid names that Zanae was talking about, say something. I overheard a conversation and it made me uncomfortable and I should have said something and I didn't. I regret it to this day. Like you see opportunities. If you're part of a discussion of, okay, what books are we going to read? Or if you hear a kid say something, like push for it, fight for them, like use your privilege, like understand that like it's so much harder for them to do things. And even the coworkers that are Black, like I think when we got started, she said, I don't want to be stirring anything. And I don't know if you saw me, I did this, stir it. Like, don't apologize for fighting for these children. And as the white teachers, like if a Black teacher says it, it's like, oh, well, she's pulling the race card. Don't worry about it. I'll play it for her. So my message to the white teachers out there is call it out. That is how we're going to combat it. It's difficult conversations. No one says that you are on purpose being racist. If we were taught that, we have been taught since we were little, from commercials, even down to going to the grocery store and seeing my stuff is in the beauty aisle and Zanae's stuff is in the ethnic aisle. That is teaching me from little that I am better, that my stuff is beautiful and hers isn't. And so I've been taught this as a kid. And as a grown-up, I have reflected and I have looked in it and say, why do I think this way? Why do I think this way? And at the core of it is I have been taught that I am better and it's not true. And so we have to start digging it up and having conversations, and teachers don't want to have them. That, oh, I'm not racist. I love Black. I'm sure you do. And I'm sure you don't mean to be. But unless we dig it up and kill it, it's just going to continue to infest. And it's going to be from little side comments about a name. And even I love that Zanae made the comment of pronouncing these children's names right. People can name their kids whatever they want. And white people can name their kids after produce, days of the week, a month. They can call them whatever they want. But if a Black person takes the time, when Black people in America, their last name they are slave names. Let's call a spade a spade. They are slave last names. And if they want to take a little bit from a grandparent, a little bit from an aunt, and create this amazing phonetically spelled name that is just uniquely to their kids, then who am I to say anything? My name's Amy, big deal. It just went along with my last name. It has no meaning whatsoever. And so it's disrespectful to our Black children when we make comments and, oh, that's a ghetto name. No, it's not. It was perfectly, it was created just for that child. So, all right, that's all I got to say about that.
I love your
funny.
passion.
Did you say, yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I love that passion and we need more of it. Go ahead, Angela.
Did you just say, this is Angela, did you just say that white people name their kids after produce? That was like, that's just going to go down for the quote of the week. Yeah, the one thing I want to say before we check out is that I would encourage teachers that theory to culture. Or even context. But if you go back to her book, Dream Keepers, she talks about it being the pedagogy of opposition. You're going to have to be willing to be disruptive. So in those schools, you are having students memorize, recall, comprehend. You are not building those higher order thinking skills, and you're not building the neurological pathways for them to take that knowledge and to transfer it and apply it out. At best, those students will only be able to go off and be in positions of just labor position. They won't be in positions where they're expected to create, to command, to direct, to innovate, to solve problems. And if we're going to get our children to grow up and to be productive and transforming individuals in our communities, it's going to start with how we teach them in the schools. They cannot be reduced to curriculum or instruction that limits them to comprehension, memorization, and recall. Especially those of us who identify as critical pedagogues, we know that that's not the type of learning that allows for students to develop those, like I said, those pathways for application, but we don't say anything because we want to get a good review. We want to be secured in our job positions. We have to implement a pedagogy of opposition. You are not serving the kids. So that's all I wanted to say for that.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Angela said about racism not being called out and having a conversation about racism being so difficult. Like, I mean, we have these Twitter conversations where we speak about racism, and they're just a few of us just constantly yapping, and people don't jump in. And every time a white teacher is called out as racist, there is an immediate defense mechanism that starts to play. And I think these are opportunities for them to self-reflect, to look at their own implicit biases. I mean, none of the, call it theater club, call it music, call it the text they read, it's all European. I mean, my daughter came one day and told me that I can't, which was a really wise thing for her age, that I can get a main role in this particular play because I am not a white character. So where are we reflecting all our children in say drama, in the music, in the arts? And these are all the role models. I mean, as Angela said, neurological pathways, what kind of pathways are we creating for them? Are they seeing themselves in the role models out there that they see in on the stage, or in the classroom, or in administration, or as a principal? So what is it that we are creating for them? Are we hiring enough Black teachers? Are we giving them people they can look up to? So there are so many things that education needs to revamp and do for children of color. I mean, I think the list is endless.
I think what you said was key about the diversity of the teachers. For example, one of my students, this was just last week, we were doing something and she paused and she was like, "Miss Ari, it's not a lot of Black kids in here." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She was like, "Our class has so many different like types of people." And I was like, "That's good, because that's what the world looks like." And if the population of our teachers represent what the world looks like, it makes it easier for kids. To be honest, I had grown up, I had a lot of women teachers, and I had a lot of, believe it or not, a lot of African American women teachers. I grew up in New York. But my daughter, on the other hand, she has had, we'll say, one teacher of color throughout her whole time of being in school. And granted, I mean, think about even from her early formative years, she's only had one teacher of color. So that's also, and she's in school a lot, and that's what she's seeing. So it's important that our schools are diversified. Our staff, even positions of leadership, are diversified. Those who are making decisions for the classroom, so that they're bringing a unique experience and it's not just one-sided.
I love this. I'm kind of like your daughter, Z. I did not have my first teacher of color until I was in the 8th grade and I moved to Georgia. I don't guess that I knew that there were Black people who were teachers. And looking back on it now, I realized that I might have been done a disservice. However, my dad was in the Army, so we didn't really have a choice about the school that we went to. So, but kids need to see people who look like them. Just like, you know, people say that there needs to be more males in elementary school so that young boys can see that being a teacher is not a girl job, that it's anybody kind of job. If you can make a difference in the life of a child, you need to be there and do it. But we also do need to make sure that we're reflective of all the genders and the racial groups and the ethnic groups, so that our kids know that this is a diverse world. And I've heard people say, "I don't see color." My skin cringes when I hear that, because the first thing that you see when you look at me is that I am a Black woman. You can see a lot of other things, but if you say that you don't see who I am as a Black woman, you're doing me a disservice. So please, I need for people to stop saying that. And that's my little soapbox that I'm going to get off of. So I'm going, Mark, can you, we're going to try and let you say what you need to say. Otherwise, I'm going to read it and then we will wrap it up. So Mark, if you would like to say what you need to say.
Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. Basically, what I was saying was, and I wanted to echo the sentiments of Angela, and that is that if the education that we have received, regardless whether it's a private education, public education, what have you, if the education that we receive does not afford a person the ability to be able to create produce, innovate, solve problems related to the community, related to culture, society, and things of that nature, then the question becomes, what is it that we've been educated to do? Simply just be employees and soldiers? When you look at the educational system in the United States, being created by the Rockefeller Foundation back in the early 1900s, one of the things that you'll see is that the goal was to create a system allow people to be workers, employees, and soldiers. So the intent was not to create a society of people that were going to be productive, be creative, be innovative, and be problem solvers. It was simply based upon the economic system of the time. And so that becomes problematic when you look at today, how we look at the inequities that exist in the school system and how that school system is not affording people the opportunity to be able to express their individuality, but also to be the best of who they are. Someone made the statement, I think it was Amy. Amy talked about calling out certain things. There's unfortunately, when you talk about the subject of white privilege, there is a privilege that in this culture that white people in this country have to be able to say certain things, because you can have 100 Black people, 100 Indian people, 100 people, 100 or 1,000 people of color to say one thing, but the moment that one white person says something, then all of a sudden it validates what's being said. It validates because now you've called it out. And so the other question that comes is, when you start dealing with these types of challenges, how the culture, most people don't want to change the culture. And when you get really down to the core fundamental issue is this thing called demographic winter, and that is the lack of the birth rate, the zero birth rate of some whites, when they feel that our power, our position, our influence is being diminished heavily and is being usurped or being taken over by people of color, regardless if you call them Black, whether you call them Indian, you call them Asian, whatever it is. That whole idea is our structure, our way of life, our system is being diminished because we are not populating, more people are populating. And so now you're seeing this uptick of all these different social issues taking place, from Charlottesville to all these other different things that you see happen in the system, in the school system. And this is the last point I want to get in. I live in St. Louis. So the community college where I'm an adjunct is right in the heart of where the Mike Brown situation took place. So we dealt with a whole lot of different things. And you'll notice that since the Mike Brown issue took place, all of the uncovering of the people who had been hiding behind racist faces and well-meaning organizations, it all started to come out. So all this stuff really started to be unveiled because of that situation, which had political implications and economic implications, but now you begin to see how it's affecting all these other different areas. So when you start talking about how do we address these things in the school system, you have to change the structure, and you have to be able to change those who occupy those offices of influence in order to push forward not a Black agenda, not a person of color agenda, but an American agenda, because the bottom line is our culture is going to change, the demographics are going to change, and we have to be able to adjust it. Otherwise, we're going to have a literal as well as a figurative civil war.
I hate to end this conversation because it has been absolutely phenomenal, but I do have a 6-year-old who has a 7 o'clock bedtime. And so I do need to get him in the bed. But before we wrap it up, I do want to share one resource with you. And I think the link has been dropped in it's been dropped in somewhere, but there's a book that I read a number of years ago, and it has been updated to reflect more recent information. And the title of it is "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" And the author of that book is Beverly Daniel Tatum. If you've not read it, I encourage you to do so, because it gives you a lot of information, and it gives you the perspective of the students, the minority students, because a lot of times people don't want to listen to what we have to say. So just read the book, and we are going to have this conversation again. I do believe Sarah is working on getting a date. And before I turn it back over to Sarah, I want to thank everybody on the panel tonight. This conversation has been eye-opening. It's been encouraging, because Sometimes I felt like I was all alone in my quest to figure out what's going on. Is there something wrong with me? You know, I'm smart, I'm Black. And my teacher said that I was a token, but obviously I am not alone. And I like that we had this diverse panel. So thank you. And hopefully we will get this back on again. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And Sarah, you're incredible for starting this whole tweet and talk thing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Oh my goodness. I really have to take my hat off if I were wearing a hat, but definitely hats off to the panel, to the moderator. So it was just incredible. Such an incredible conversation about such an important topic. So we are bringing it back for part 2, which will be May 19th. So if anyone is interested in signing up, hopefully we'll have the panelists, if they're free to sign up, as well as anyone watching or listening or whatever, then just go to podcast.edumatch.org/sign up, and we will have part 2 of this conversation. So totally excited about that. So wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. In about 14 minutes, we're going to be chatting with Dr. Will about his documentary, The Edupreneur. So stay tuned for that. Same bad time, same bad channel, podcast with an s.edumatch.org/tweet talk. Also wanted to let y'all know, because this situation came up again today. So if you are getting robocalled, just know that it is not EduMatch. It is not this EduMatch. There's someone out there illegally using our name. So just a heads up for anyone. So if you are being targeted by these robocalls, or you know anyone who's receiving robocalls from someone claiming to be EduMatch, then there's information on our site, on our Twitter, on our Facebook about ways to combat this. You can file an incident report with the FCC, and they will investigate. And please, we ask you to do this because we need for this to stop. We need for this to stop. It's been going on for a few months now. So please kindly put in your reports, encourage other people to do the same. But we're not going to leave on that note. We are going to leave on a note of excitement. So definitely come back and join us. So this episode will be put on our podcast within the next couple of weeks, as well as on Facebook. So can't wait to see you there. Can't wait to see you for part 2. So everybody, thank you so much, and have a great, great evening.